Welcome into the 24/7 Sports YouTube page. I'm Emily Proud. We're starting off with some breaking news here. Bryan Harsin is out after one full season at Auburn. He finishes with a record of 9-12, 4-9 in conference play. Nathan King from Auburn Undercover is here to discuss the news. Not necessarily a surprise, Nathan. They tried to fire him after last season. The athletic director who hired him stepped down at the end of August, and reports have surfaced throughout the season of when it might happen. So I'll ask you this, Nathan, why today?
Yeah, well, it kind of coincides with their new athletic director, who has not been officially put into place yet, but it is going to be John Cohen from Mississippi State. And, you look at the new Auburn University president, Chris Roberts, as well, who was put into place around mid-May. They kind of want a clean slate for the new athletic director. As much as it would maybe have endeared the fan base to the new guy to let him have his first decree be to fire Bryan Harsin, they wanted to get all of that out of the way before they'll likely officially announce him later today, and then we'll probably introduce him later in the week. But it's been a season full of last straws. I mean, you saw their worst home loss in a decade against Penn State early in the season. You mentioned some of those records there, Emily. That includes 7 of 8 SEC losses, their last 8 games, 9 out of 10 losses in their last 10 Power 5 games. And just overall, it's been a really disappointing past year for him. You mentioned what happened in February. There were a lot of parameters that were in place that were just not going to be set up for success. He was already on rocky ground heading into the season because of what happened in the offseason. They needed a pretty big year. Most of us thought probably 8 wins was going to be the bar for him to get to, once it was apparent that this team was not going to perform and was going to be near the bottom of the SEC. It was just a matter of time. Seemed like it was going to be them waiting until the end of the season, but this is a move that makes a lot of sense because with the transfer window opening at the beginning of December, obviously the new athletic director in place, obviously you have the signing class in the middle of December. You've got to get this thing rolling. You've got to have it to where when the regular season ends, assuming it's another coach who is coaching in college football currently, you've got to have that thing ready to go and have him ready to start as soon as the regular season ends. So it's a move that makes sense. And we've honestly just been waiting on the shoe to finally drop. And today was the day.
Yeah, you laid out everything that went wrong under Bryan Harsin. It might be easier to tell me what went right, but I want to ask you how. How did we get to this point where he has the record that he has and is eventually fired after just 21 months on the job?
Yeah, you look at in the offseason, they had 19 scholarship players transfer out of the program. And those numbers, aren't super abnormal when you look all across the country. But you look at some of those names, a guy like Bo Nix, who he might be going to New York at the end of the year. That was the biggest one. So we knew they were going to have a quarterback issue this season. A lot of their talented defensive players have moved on. And so they lost a lot of depth in this offseason. You also look at a lot of the coaching changes. He only had coordinators on both sides of the ball for 1 year. He fired Mike Bobo. Derek Mason obviously left and took a pay cut to go to Oklahoma State. That was a bit of a red flag, and that was right before the investigation came to light that that questioned Bryan Harsin's treatment of players and coaches in his program. Obviously, the university opted to retain him after that. They didn't find anything sufficient enough to move on. But again, it was you're going to see a lot of people today say that Bryan Harsin was set up for failure at Auburn, and there's a lot of accuracies about that. But at the same time, once this season started, he didn't do much to cause much confidence in the fan base. He had ample opportunities to talk about what the team could do to improve, that kind of stuff, just kind of basic, coach answers that you'd see from guys across the country. I remember earlier in the year, Shane Beamer just took huge exception with someone saying that his team had quit and, went off on this big tirade about it. Bryan Harsin just it's been a long time since he's shown that much passion about the direction of this team. And so it was pretty clear that they were taking a nosedive, and it's just a bad roster all around right now. And recruiting is also a big thing that doesn't need to be understated as people look at the reasons why this happened. Auburn was last in the SEC for a good bit of the summer. They've moved up a little bit, but overall, it's just been very inconsistent recruiting. They had a ton of official visitors on campus. They were only able to land one of their official visitors over the summer that was a blue chip prospect. And overall, it's the worst recruiting Auburn's had in the past, 15, 20 years. And obviously, that's not sustainable for the future of an SEC program.
Yeah, you mentioned all the turnover at the coordinator position of other coaches, and 31 scholarship players in total have transferred
Yes.
out of the program since he took over as the head coach, again, just 21 months ago. So how tough a job is this for whoever's stepping into it?
Yeah, it's a tough job, in comparison to the expectations around the league. You're going to need somebody. I think the biggest thing when you're looking at who the next head coach could be and kind of the, licenses that person might have and what they've proved at their past destinations. It starts with recruiting, and then it starts with being aware of what it takes to build an SEC staff. You look at some of the coaches that were on the staff this season. Their defensive coordinator didn't have a lot of cachet in college football. He had only been at Boise State a couple years, and before that, he was a longtime assistant at Eastern Washington. You look at their offensive coordinator, Eric Keesaw. His offenses hadn't performed very well in the past out on the West Coast, and he started last season as an analyst for Auburn. And so, staff building and recruiting, I think, are going to be the top two things. But we were mentioning John Cohen earlier, the new athletic director coming over from Mississippi State, and a big reason why he's making this move is because of how many resources Auburn has. They're doing very well in NIL right now. It was kind of a shaky start for them, but now they've honed in on a flagship collective, and they've raised about $13 million for that one. And of course, Auburn's a great destination in terms of where it fits in the Southeastern footprint. There's going to be a lot of support here. There's going to be a lot of money. And it's objectively, it's kind of tough to argue that it's not a top 15 program in college football. And it's been that way for a long time. So it is a difficult job because you're competing with the Georgias and the Alabamas in the world. And then on the recruiting trail, you're competing with Florida, LSU, Texas A&M year after year. But I think Auburn fans, for better or for worse, they have seen how bad this thing can be in terms of recruiting, and how, I guess, just sort of out of touch a coaching staff can be with what it takes to recruit successfully and be successful in the SEC. Maybe they'll have a little bit more leniency with this next hire, and not that they didn't have any patience with Bryan Harsin, because things went downhill pretty quickly, but just an understanding of what it takes to succeed in the SEC. I think that's probably the biggest thing. That's a big ask, and somebody like a Deion Sanders, that wouldn't necessarily be what you'd say about him. You'd just be talking about a guy who's built up a program very consistently in just the past couple of years, very quickly in Jackson State, and has done a good job recruiting, obviously. And so, it's still a top job. There's a lot of advantages for it right now, and that's evident in the fact that people think somebody like Lane Kiffin could be up for this job. He's doing a great job at Ole Miss. He's been one of the most successful coaches in the country. But it's Auburn. They've got more money, they've got more support, and they have a lot more resources to offer. And so they're going to take a couple big swings during this coaching search. We'll see how many of them they're able to land.
All right. You had a lot of names in that one. I want to dig a little bit deeper into what's next. But first, you also mentioned money. This is big money college football, which means we've got some buyouts here. How much does Bryan Harsin is Bryan Harsin now owed by Auburn?
So we were calculating it before we started. So he's owed half of his remaining buyout, half of the 70% of the remaining amount of his contract. If everyone's able to keep track of that math at home, that's about $15.3 million. So half of that is owed within the next 30 days. It's a pretty standard, severance for a contract. It's followed by 4 annual payments. And remember that Auburn spent and will continue to spend close to $21.5 million on Malzahn's buyout. That was from obviously the end of the 2020 season. You're talking about a program that is about to move in next month. Bryan Harsin isn't able to see the grand opening of the $92 million football complex, but they're spending a lot of money on that. They just put Bruce Pearl on an 8-year contract extension, obviously the highly successful men's basketball coach. So I say all of that to say, it's money. Money obviously is something that Auburn has had a lot of in the past few years, and that's been evident with kind of the quick triggers they've had with their head coaches. But it's not like it's endless, and so they do need to be smart about how they go about this coaching search. And I do think there are maybe some candidates who could be a bit out of their price range, just depending on extensions here and there. I think Hugh Freeze was already able to leverage some of just the rumors that came about and swirled about him maybe being a candidate for this job before they even hired Bryan Harsin. I believe, he got that extension through 2030. And so money, is going to be a factor here. It won't be as big of a factor as it is for other programs, because obviously Auburn's got plenty of it. But yeah, they've spent, close to $40 million now on their past two, to fire their past 2 football coaches within the span of about the past 2 years.
A lot of money to pay guys to not coach your football team. All right, you threw out a couple of names here I got to ask about. Deion Sanders, Lane Kiffin, and you threw in Hugh Freeze there just a second ago. Now that we know that John Cohen is the guy that will make this hire, who would you put on this coaching wish list?
Well, and here's the thing too about Cohen. About a week ago, he wasn't really on anybody's radar to become the athletic director, and that's how things go in in AD searches and in coaching searches. As well, Bryan Harsin wasn't really on anybody's radar until a few days before he was hired during the last coaching search. I say all of that to say we've got the guys that we think are going to be near the top of the list. Obviously, you talk about a guy like Lane Kiffin who was interested in this job the last time it was open. Hugh Freeze's name has been swirled around. I'm not sure how much Auburn would want to take the risk there. Obviously, Deion Sanders, his name is going to continue to come up for these Power 5 openings. But you just never know. What if in a week or so you get your new athletic director, John Cohen, you get him in place, and he's had his eye on somebody for a while. Auburn seemingly is going to give him a little bit more leeway to actually lead the athletic department. That was something that was being reported this morning, is that Auburn and new president Christopher Roberts are going to give him, gave him the assurances that, hey, this is going to be your athletic department to lead. There's not going to be as many hands in the cookie jar. We'll see how accurate that actually is. We'll see how that plays out over time, but you never know if he's got a candidate and he comes in today and says, look, this is a guy we need to vet. I would also mention Jeff Grimes. He was the offensive line coach when Auburn won a national title in 2010. Now, obviously he's the Baylor offensive coordinator who's very successful as the offensive coordinator at BYU as well. Somebody who is well regarded in this area. Another guy that I think people need to keep an eye on, a name that I haven't seen pop up that much, but a name that I have heard from people around Auburn. That's Charles Kelly. He's Alabama's co-defensive coordinator and secondary coach. He's been all over this footprint. Obviously, he was at Florida State for a long time. And if you were to talk to high school coaches in the state of Alabama and probably the state of Georgia as well, Charles Kelly is beloved in this area. And so you never know which direction this thing is going to take. That's a couple names that we're going to throw out there here on day one of the coaching search. But then in my opinion, if you look at home runs in terms of what they've proven already at the college level, Lane Kiffin is huge. He'd be a guy who I think this fan base has already sort of latched onto when it was pretty clear when it was clear this season that things were going to work out and they were going to move on from him at some point. People really latched on to Lane Kiffin. They like his attitude. They like what he's done at Ole Miss, sort of resurrecting that program very quickly. And of course, it would be the second time in the past couple of decades that they've stolen a coach away from Ole Miss. Obviously, they did the same with Tommy Tuberville. So those are a few of the names we're watching here on the first day of the coaching search. But like all these things, it'll take a bunch of twists and turns over the course of the next week or so. I do think we're probably looking at a hire that'll be made after the conclusion of the regular season. That just makes the most sense here at this current juncture. But we'll see how much it changes. It certainly seems like it did under Bryan Harsin when he got hired. Nobody expected him, kind of came out of left field. So we'll see who John Cohen's guys are once he gets in the building here within the next couple of days. We'll see, what candidates he pitches, and obviously we'll see if we're able to track them and share them with our readers.
Certainly, we will see. It is day one, as you said, of the coaching search, an already busy fall for you. Just got a whole lot busier. Nathan King, thank you so much. Be sure to follow along his work at auburnundercover.com for all things on the Auburn Tigers coaching search. Nathan, thank you so much.